All right. Hey, everybody. It's great to be here. My name is David Prescott. I'm going to be moderating the webinar tonight. I just want to give a great big shout out to our guest, Jenny Coleman from Stop It Now, who's about to join us, as well as Cindy Prizio from One Standard of Justice, which is a proud affiliate of NARSOL. Some organizations that are doing some really great work. So thanks to everybody for joining us, including Senator Gary Winfield in Connecticut. I'm up here in the state of Vermont myself. Anyway, it's wonderful to have you on board. Hi, Jenny. Great to see you.
Good evening, David. Hi, everyone.
And all right. Well, I think what I'm going to do is just have you get us started, Jenny, if that's okay with you.
Yes, and I did put together a brief presentation because I wanted to talk a little bit about Stop It Now, and as I'm the director, but I am really hoping for conversation and welcome questions throughout this presentation, and then after the PowerPoint, the formal slides. Cindy, thank you so much for asking me to do this, and certainly, Senator, thank you so much for sponsoring this. It's really exciting to be here with you all tonight to talk about a little bit of the work that Stop It Now does through the lens of reaching out to people and offering help in a way that we hope is supportive, respectful, compassionate, humanistic, and effective. So I am Jenny Coleman. I am the director of Stop It Now. Stop It Now is a child sexual abuse prevention program. We're based in Massachusetts, but we are a national program with some international activities and relationships as well. There's actually a Stop It Now in the UK and Scotland, in Flanders, in the Netherlands, and in 2022, Stop It Now in Australia and a Stop It Now in Belgium will be opening their doors. We are celebrating our 30th anniversary. We are a very unique program. We were instrumental in working with the CDC years ago in recognizing child sexual abuse as a public health issue. And one of, if not the primary thing that we've really brought to the table is kind of a spin at looking at what we can do to keep children safe. We've talked about in the past how to help people not get abused and what children should do, and asked people who'd been abused, as we should, what could have helped and what they need. But we had left out a very important conversation, and that was the conversation with people who were looking for a roadway to help and support and understanding, because they had concerns about their own interests, their own behaviors, their own thoughts about children. So we really shifted the prevention focus from looking at children and at the victim, and rather looking at how we can think about prevention by talking to those who may be at risk to abuse. So we are a unique program, and we talk with everyone. When we initially began many of our programming, our goal was to reach out specifically to adults who were sexually abusing, to have them enter into conversation with us about being responsible, being accountable, trying to find again that supportive environment. But we have people have reached out to us over the years from across the field of child sexual abuse, from a professional place, from parents, family members, community members, faith-based leaders, to survivors themselves, folks who have lived experiences with sexual abuse, because we know that sexual abuse is just that conversation that has people running out of doors, not looking, behind them. They don't want to have these conversations. And it is so isolative that regardless of where you are in this issue, seems like such a small world. And we were joking earlier, it is nighttime, so my mouth may tangle a little bit, but this is a huge issue, but nobody wants to talk about it. Stop It Now was able to begin to open up ways to have conversations that weren't blaming, that weren't accusatory, that weren't shaming. We do work along a continuum. We really are focused. This is where we wish we could live, is in primary prevention. Before children are sexually abused, before an adult or a youth has sexually harmed or abused another person. We want to help folks have conversations early about safety plans, about boundaries, about consent, about respect, and just help folks feel that they're doing everything they can to keep themselves, their families, and their communities safe. We know that sexual abuse, of course, does not just impact the person who has harmed another person or the person who's been harmed. It affects our families, our neighbors, our community. We are available also to help folks talk through what if there are warning signs? What if it seems like there's a relationship that just doesn't sit well, that there are what some people can term as grooming behaviors. I use that word cautiously, and we can talk about that if that comes up. But how do you intervene when there is a sense that something is going on or could happen? And we also help folks after something has happened. Where's healing begin? How do you begin that healing process? How do you talk about it? What do you need to feel safe now moving forward? We do this in a variety of ways, and I'll talk about some of those programs more in depth, but primarily our help services, which includes our helpline, which is what I'll talk about in a bit more, is a confidential toll-free phone number, chat line, email service, social media access for anyone with questions about, from the very most basic primary place, how do I keep my children safe, to I have found my partner watching CSAM, what do I do about that, to I'm really concerned I have a sexual attraction to children and I want to be safe. We also provide public education because we know, particularly as a public health issue, that education, awareness, understanding the scope of child sexual abuse is so important, and that there is so much confusion and scare tactics and language that can feel really conflictual out there in the world, and that it's really important that people have accurate, reliable information. Our public policy work is small because we're small, but we're generally working in public policy with partners, national and international partners, to help us look at both funding for prevention, because primary prevention funding, as many of us know out here, can be really hard to come by. And so in order to do that, we also are helping folks think about advocacy with legislative action. And then we also train primarily youth serving organizations to design safe programs. I just wanted to share a couple of quick projects where we've always got other things going on besides the services that I just talked about. Right now, we are partnering with a major pornography hub where we are putting advertisements on their hub so that as somebody who may be out there watching pornography, and as we know and what some of the research shows us is that there's can be this pathway. It's not automatic. I'm not talking about porn addiction, but what we know is that when something is constantly in your face, you could click. And our goal is to provide folks with a message of, hey, maybe this isn't a place you want to visit, or do you have any worries about what you've been viewing or what interests you? Would you like to talk about it? We also recently just finished a new pilot for a website, whatsok.org, which is separate from our Stop It Now site. This site is particularly for youth and young adults, thinking about primary prevention and thinking about the importance of helping children and young people address the questions and concerns they have about sexuality, sexual development, and sexual behaviors is just critical. We just got funding to run that program for another year, and I'll share just a little bit more about that in a second. And then just for another example of the kind of work we do, and maybe you saw the press release, but we've partnered with USA Football, or rather I should say USA Football's partnered with us to train their coaches in having the safest environment possible for their young athletes, in a way that really helps encourage coaches to think about the culture of prevention. You know, how can they be a trusting adult? How can they be an adult who knows what warning signs are? But most importantly, how can we just help them have the confidence to speak up when they have any concerns?
Hey, Jenny, can I just jump in quickly?
Do.
You've mentioned CSAM, and I see it in the slide. Can you just remind us what that stands for?
Absolutely. It's so funny. I was just reading a federal report that talked about child pornography, and I thought, oh, I wish they wouldn't use that language. So CSAM, child sexual abuse material, can also child sexual abuse images is language that we have been replacing child pornography with for a number of years now, recognizing that we really want to understand child sexual abuse material as criminal and harmful, where child pornography can have a little bit of vagueness about it. It's got the word pornography, that's illegal. And it can confuse folks about, what's really being produced, who's involved, children being being sexually abused while that crime is being filmed. So the use of child sexual abuse material is to really help to name it as what it is.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, good question, thanks. So, I didn't really say a lot about myself, David, and to this group. And I'm always a little hesitant. I mean, I've come into this work. I've been at Stop It Now for about 10 years. But I actually applied at Stop It Now to work on their helpline probably 15 to 20 years ago, because I couldn't believe that there was actually a resource out there that thought about helping people before they crossed a line, before they hurt someone and subsequently hurt themselves. That just blew my mind. I had worked, my background is working in community mental health, in residential programs, in foster care programs as a clinician. I'm a licensed clinician here in Massachusetts. And I was always that person working with youth who had been abused, or working with families who had had a child who'd been abused. And I can't believe, it still blows me away sometimes, that prevention was not in any of my studies, that we never talked about the people who need help before there is a crime committed, or before harm is committed in any way. And I was so excited about the Stop It Now program. And so fortunately, a few years later, while I didn't get the job at the time, I reapplied again about when I was moving out to this part of the state. And this time as the director of the helpline, and I was hired. And I can't tell you what the last 10 years learning experience has been for me. I think it is amazing that we don't look at any sort of public health issue from that lens of, oh, what can we do to make sure this doesn't happen? Or what can we do to help prevent this happen? What can we do to slow down this progress? And more often we're talking about what to do after it has happened, or how to punish whoever has done what has happened. And this made sense to me that in order to help people live safe lives, we have to include everyone in that conversation. Now, I know that's really difficult for folks. It's funny, I don't always, if I'm getting my hair cut or I'm at the dentist and someone says to me, what do you do? I don't automatically say, oh, I work for a child sex abuse prevention program. And I talk to people before they abuse children, hopefully providing them resources and support and reducing isolation and shame for them, so that they feel like they can make some different decisions in their life. That's such a great way to turn off a conversation, right? But I am incredibly proud of this work. And I know that I want folks to understand that I believe fully that what Stop It Now is doing by reaching out to people who have maybe already harmed children, or who are saying that they themselves are worried about whether they can be safe, that's got to be one of the first steps that we take. I remember being asked once was giving a training, and a student said, why child sexual abuse? Why not, 80,000 other, social service causes? Why have you picked child sexual abuse as your career? And it's not necessarily that I picked it. I have always worked on behalf of children, wanting children to feel safe and whole, having, nurturing love opportunities. But what I do know about the work that we do in keeping children safe is that all of the many issues that I do care about, the environment, civil rights, equality, across there's my late night brain. If we can't help children be safe in the world and help the adults who are caring for them feel safe and have the resources they need, all those other things aren't going to get attended to. That if we can't help folks feel seen, valuable, meaningful, important, that they're worthwhile, then they're not going to care about the environment. then they're not going to care about their neighbors next door. So this work goes beyond a job for me. It really is about how to just help the world. I mean, that sounds so basic, but that's what it is. And, another quick story, when I first started at Stop It Now, I was being trained by a helpline counselor who wasn't a clinician, and she was a very mild-mannered woman, very sweet. She had worked as a career counselor at a local college in the area, and she had just gotten off of the phone with a person who was really struggling with their sexual behaviors, and it was a difficult call. And I asked her, how do you do this work? And some of you may have heard this story, but she then proceeded to tell me an old Cherokee story about an elder who was teaching his grandson about life and said that a fight is going on inside of me. And he told his grandson that everybody has this fight going on inside of them, that it's a terrible fight. It's between two wolves, one who may be evil, or which means full of anger, envy, sorrow, greed, arrogance, all of those more negative related kind of characteristics, false pride, superiority. And the other is good, and he's joy, and he's peace, and he's acceptance, and he's patience and generosity and empathy and faith and compassion. And the grandson, as the elder was telling him this story, thought about this and said, well, which wolf will win in each one of us? And the elder said, the one that you feed. And that was incredibly meaningful to me, because I do believe that each of us are good people. It's just, there's not a bad people sort of thing. We want to feed and nurture and care the joy, the laughter, the humility in all of us. I want to be a safe person. And I know that there's many folks that I speak with that say, I want to be a safe person. And sometimes what we may call as the evil wolf or the bad wolf really is just there's no resources. I'm alone. I don't have hope. And so if we can feed the hope, and we could feed resources and information, guidance, support, then that's what we're going to grow in folks, is that ability to take better care of themselves and to take better care of the people that they care about. I want to be really clear that I'm not calling anybody a good or bad person. And in fact, good and bad are generally labels that I really kind of despise. Certainly there's harmful and illegal and abusive behaviors that the behaviors themselves are bad, but as people, I stay away from these labels. So, to feed the good wolf, we need to really understand that our attitude has to guide us. This is how we first engage with our struggles. Whether we believe that we need to treat each other with respect and humility, that we need to build up our hope. We need to build up our courage. We need to build up our confidence to step into hard places. And if we have an attitude that, oh, I'm not touching this, or that's for them, these people, those people, whatever those people are, don't deserve this, then we're already, going down the wrong path. We aren't feeding the good wolf. We know how important it is. I say we, and I guess I'm hoping this audience has been thinking about how we use language. I'm a big proponent, as a Stop It Now, in really talking about people in person first, that we don't call people labels. There certainly are diagnoses that may make sense. But I often talk with folks who say, I'm a pedophile. I'm like, oh, did somebody call you that? Did somebody diagnose you that? No, I just know this is must be who I am. And we know that kind of language is immediately barriers for folks and how they see themselves, whether they see themselves as a good person, deserving of respect and of help. There's a lot more we could say about that, the whole self-fulfilling prophecy. The more that we use language that puts people down or puts boxes around them, the more people believe that that's who they are. And so it's not leading into any sort of prevention-minded actions or engagement relationships. We know that people feel that others look at them as a problem if they are to share that they're struggling with sexual thoughts or feelings towards children. And that just knowing that people will look down at them or be scared by them or want to literally harm them is a barrier to them talking about what they need to be safe and what they need to feel whole and to have a life that is fulfilling. We know that it's really important that we continue to advocate for folks and speak up, that we aren't silent when we see somebody being treated unfairly, when they're not getting the resources that they need. When we look at issues of diversity, equity, inclusion, when we know that Brown and Black children and adults are more quickly labeled as a problem, as opposed to what could be going on, what's the education available to them, what are the resources, what do their parents need, what does their community need, then again, we are setting up boundaries and barriers that mean that the good wolf isn't being fed, that we're feeding that angry, that evil wolf. So while it's important that we stigmatize harmful behaviors, while we call them out, it's counterproductive to stigmatize people. So one of the big things that Stop It Now does is help folks break down the myths, because education about what we're doing is so important. And if people feel like only a certain kind of person is the kind of person who could sexually abuse a child, then we're going to miss lots of opportunities to talk with folks about their behaviors, to talk in different environments about what kind of safety planning we need. It's very easy to say, oh, that happens over there only with that person. I remember years ago talking to my own sister about safety planning, wanting to share Stop It Now's materials with her as she was raising her 2 young children. And her response to me was, oh, I know everyone in my children's school, and we have some privilege. They were in private school in Oregon. I'm sure that it was a fairly folks that probably didn't struggle as much around economics, around housing. And in her mind, these were all safe people. And that's not necessarily the case. It's anybody, any age, right? Any faith, any economic background, any job, any background. And when we see people as only those people, only that person, who looks like the guy on Law and Order SVU as the sex offender, then we are labeling people and we're missing opportunities to help other people who may need our help. We also know that we need to break down that myth that it isn't just a single reason. People think that the only people that sexually abuse a child is somebody who meets the diagnostic criteria of pedophilia. That is not true. Children can be sexually abused for a number of reasons, everything from folks who just really don't have information about boundaries, safe boundaries, healthy sexuality. I remember speaking to a man who's now in his 80s, did serve time for an offense. And he said, if I had known that you were around in the 80s, I would have had someone to talk with about some of the thinking errors that were going on for me when I thought that I was getting a message from a child that this was okay. I didn't know that. I didn't know that children could be harmed this way. And many of you may be shaking your head right now thinking, well, how did you not know that? But in fact, there are lots of gaps in our education because people have such a difficulty talking about sexuality, sexual development, relationships, intimacy. There are many, many people that don't have the information that they need about what is appropriate, what is safe, what's happening for children developmentally that would help us better understand why it's not okay to have sexual relationships with children. Many folks who sexually abuse children are primarily attracted to adults. There may have been a situation that all of, as what do they say with a storm, everything comes in at the right time. There's stress in the life, there's opportunity, there's somebody who doesn't feel supported, who's having other maybe psychiatric issues that are going on in their life. And this could be one of the ways that they fall apart. There could be addiction issues. There could be other psychiatric issues. There could be cognitive issues. There's so many reasons. And so when we just say, again, those pedos, those perverts, we are talking about a very small population of people who have a primary sexual attraction to children. The majority of sexual abuse cases do not fit that kind of box. People also think that folks who have abused a child are always destined to be that, somebody who abuses children. Or that if somebody talks about having a sexual fantasy about a child or interest in a child, or just noticed that a child was good looking, that there must be something wrong with them and immediately trust is eroded. It's really a lot of black and white, right and wrong thinking myths that get in our way of seeing people and the opportunities that they're presenting to help them get the support or the education, the treatment, or whatever it is that they need. I'm going to touch on just a little bit that not everybody who has a sexual attraction to children is going to abuse a child or is at risk to abuse children as well. And so people who, often the language being used by those folks who are using this language for themselves, minor attracted people, are saying, I feel like this, I have these feelings, I have these interests, but I'm not going to act on them. I know what safe boundaries are. I know what safe behaviors are with children. I understand that. And that can be one of the myths too, that anybody who's had these feelings is automatically a monster, is automatically a bad person. We can't trust them. And that is not the case. We know that these people aren't monsters. And as I share with you some of the folks that we have talked with, I hope to share just a few of those stories of such courage to reach out and say, I want help. And for me, a monster does not ask for help. A monster doesn't bravely say, I've been struggling with something that all of society would condemn me for. I'm not sure my life will ever be worthwhile, but I am taking this incredibly courageous step so that I can ask for help. That's not what how we define a monster. We also know that when we use the language monster or any of those other kind of really scary language, what we're doing is saying, oh, I don't know if we can deal with that. That monster is in the room. I mean, can you imagine we say to children, don't let the monsters get to you. What child wants to go up against a monster? Not to mention then they're looking for the monster and they're not looking for somebody in their life that they know and that they love who's struggling with their behaviors. So these are some of the myths that Stop It Now has worked on for through our 30 years to try to erode, to try to get rid of, because they're not serving us in a prevention mode at all. So I know that talking with folks about perpetration prevention, which is what we do, we are trying to prevent the perpetration of sexual abuse, is really difficult for many of the reasons I've just mentioned. All of those barriers go up. The whole yuck factor comes up. People think, okay, you're going to tell me how to find the bad guy. And in fact, I've had that. We're looking for you to tell us how to spot every grooming behavior. We want to know what the bad guy looks like. That's not what we're talking about in many cases. What we're talking about, again, are those early minor infractions of boundaries. And so when we're training in youth serving communities with foster parents, with teachers, with staff in colleges and on campuses, we use this story to help demonstrate what it is that we're asking folks to do. So if you can, I'd like to ask you all to imagine that you're at a big community picnic and you're seated at a table with a lot of children, a lot of different adults. And at this table is Mr. Green. Now, for the point of this story, Mr. Green is not somebody who has any sexual interest in children. But what Mr. Green does do is this. He talks very maturely, lots of sexual content in front of children. He has no problem talking about his new girlfriend, how great she is in the sack. He has no problem talking about that sexy show he saw the other night. He tells dirty jokes, and just in general is making folks uncomfortable with this very mature language in front of kids. Now, we can't expect children to say, hey, excuse me, Mr. Green, you're breaking one of our rules. We're not allowed to talk like that. Right. But what we can expect is for other adults to say to Mr. Green, either in the bigger circle at the picnic table, hey, Mr. Green, children are present, watch your language. They may pull Mr. Green aside and talk to Mr. Green. And we use this example because it really helps illustrate for people that we have opportunities really, really early on to talk with folks about behaviors in a way that doesn't have to be accusatory, that doesn't have to be, we don't have to assume or know for certain. In fact, I told you that Mr. Green wasn't somebody with sexual interest in children, but in fact, maybe we don't know that. It doesn't matter. What we know is that that behavior is what isn't so kosher for these kids, that this could open up a vulnerable environment. It could give kids the message that it's okay to have these kinds of conversations in front of children, that adults can talk about sex in front of children without any sort of boundaries, and that adults aren't going to speak up. So our invitation to folks is to, we're not looking to label you. We're not looking to put some, oh, we got to put you in a box and put you over here, you're dangerous, but to call all of us out, every single one of us as adults, caregivers, members of the community, to look at our boundaries, to look at how we're talking about sexual anything in front of kids. And that doesn't come from a place of don't talk about it all. We need to have healthy conversations about sex. We need to make sure kids have askable adults to talk about their questions with. But we need to be able to have these conversations early too about safe behaviors. So one of the ways we do this, I've mentioned, is our helpline. It is always free, it is always confidential, and it's anonymous. And I'll talk more about that in a sec. I'm just going to do a very, very quick visit for our What's Okay helpline, which I said we just opened. And I wanted to share some of the questions that we're hearing, because what we know, and what we know from our Stop It Now helpline, is that when you provide folks a safe and non-judgmental and respectful place to ask questions, they will. If you provide them a place where they can ask for help and support, they will. Research has shown that minor attracted folks have said that I don't know where there was help for me. I don't know if there's help for me. I can't ask anybody for help. I'm afraid I'll get arrested just if I talk about what I'm feeling. That's a barrier. That means that we are setting folks up to have limited support in their life, to feel invisible, to feel less than, and that puts them more at risk in their life. So our goal was to reach 14 to 22-year-olds who may have questions about sexual behaviors, interests, situations in their life. We were hoping to hear from 10 people in the scope of a 6-week pilot. We heard from over 40. We were hoping to get 500 website visits. We had over 5,000 website visits. And these are some of the questions that we're hearing. Questions about the type of viewing that kids are watching, hentai, lolicon, other anime. Kids who are talking about, is it okay that I'm 17 and I'm thinking about a 15-year-old? Is it okay? I was abused. What does that mean for me? Does that mean I'm going to hurt someone? I think about my younger siblings sexually. I've harmed my younger siblings sexually. What do I do? Can I tell my parents? Is there help for me? There isn't a resource like that for youth at this time. There are resources that are some fabulous resources to talk about healthy sexuality. But when kids have a question, and I think adults as well, am I normal? Is this okay? Is what I'm doing okay? And there's no place to go to get that answer. They're sitting with their dark wolves. They're sitting with the wolves that can eat them. And so we wanted to make sure that they had a place. Now, our helpline does respond to folks, as we said, from all perspectives, whatever place they are in a situation involving child sexual abuse. But I wanted to share some of the voices of the folks that reach out to us that are calling for themselves. They are very clearly committed to not committing harm. I want to be clear, too, that our helpline isn't just for anybody with sexual interests in children, but specifically, I mean, it is for anybody, but it is specifically for those adults who feel that they need help managing them. We have had conversations, and we work with and consider partners with folks like Virtuous Pedophiles and Before You Act. We seek out the guidance and feedback from minor attracted individuals. And we are very clear on the fact that just because you say you're minor attracted doesn't put you in the at-risk category. But our helpline is for the folks that are at risk. It is for people who are saying, I need help. So you can see one of these are real life stories that I'm sharing. I just want to know how I can create a good method of suppressing my thoughts in children. How can I build my own personal methods of prevention? We've heard inquiries like this, just, oh my gosh, along such a range of, is there surgery? Are there parts of my body that I could cut off? Should I kill myself because people are never going to see me as anything other than a monster? The stories are quite heartbreaking. And I'm not saying that to kind of like pull at people's heartstrings, but I do want people to see folks who are challenged by sexual interest in children as humans who, like many of us, may have had some areas in our life that we feel very uncomfortable with. And this is certainly a very different area, but you may be able to ask for help. And where can these folks ask for help before something has happened? That's what we want to be able to provide.
Hey, Jenny, can I jump in? I'm not sure what your timing is, but we had a couple of questions that seem really pertinent to this. Is it okay if I jump in?
Time. Do it.
Oh, perfect. Okay. So one person asked, so it looks like what's okay is great. And on the other hand, what to do about 10-year-olds, for example, who are viewing CSAM? Any thoughts on that? Have you been getting any contact from kids who are that young?
We've heard from a 13-year-old, and we're just about to kind of enter into the second year. We very specifically did start with a 14 to 22-year-olds, but not without recognizing that this is not, it doesn't just start then at 14. We know it starts at 10. So I think that this year will continue to help inform us of the kind of language with youth and the resources with youth that can be most helpful for them, because we don't want a lecturing tone. And we know with a 10-year-old, one of the things we really want to understand is that kids may be looking, or not maybe, kids are looking at this material through kids' eyes and not adult eyes. How they're interpreting this, how they're engaging with it, what it is that they're looking for may be very, very different than what an older teen or an adult looks for. So the more that we understand kids' needs for healthy sexual education, to have a resource to ask the questions that are being presented. And in this day and age, kids have these questions, they're everywhere. There's sex in front of them everywhere. So often when we find that kids are looking at material online, they have maybe accidentally found it, but what they were looking for wasn't so much the stimulating reward, but rather information. And often we find that kids who are looking at child sexual abuse material online have probably entered a search as, what does sex look like for kids? Because they're wanting to know from their, what is it for me? Not, I wasn't looking for a child who's being sexually abused by an adult. I wanted to know how kids have sex together. Now, I'm not saying that's the best question for a 10-year-old either, but if anything, it tells me this kid's got questions. If I'm talking about a particular 10-year-old, this kid has heard or seen something. It has raised some inquiries for him or her about what's normal, what should sex look like, what should I be into, is it messy, do I have to take my clothes off, is it fun, should I scream? And we need to figure out how to address those questions.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And there's the other piece that was lurking in the back of my mind too, which is that the 10-year-old is there's a real trauma component to it as well. Not necessarily, but in many circumstances. So I imagine that that's part of the mix as well.
It is. And it's funny, David, if you had asked me the same question 5 years ago, I would have jumped on trauma as my first response.
Yes.
And I just feel like now, it's just so prevalent. And as we not come out of COVID, maybe coming out of COVID one day, but as we know the role of the internet, of electronic media in front of kids, it's just there. And so even a kid without trauma is being exposed to things that are making them go, huh? I want to, we know 10-year-olds want to grow up fast. It's sex. I need to find out about this.
Thank you. Excellent. And maybe coming out of COVID round 3, I don't know. Anyway, there was also another question just on along these lines, which is how do you provide confidentiality other than saying, don't worry, anything you tell us will be confidential? Great question.
It is a really great question. I mean, nothing is 100% anonymous in this world. So that was one thing in the last couple of years, we started really thinking about our language, because I think we used to say that, but given that you really from URLs to IP addresses. So what we tell folks is that we do not need any identifying information to help them. And in fact, we go out of our way to not solicit that information. We don't need last names. We don't need addresses. We are national. We don't collect email addresses. We don't collect telephone numbers. We don't collect chat IPs. They are hidden on our system. If we do get identifying information, I do want to share this, though, that if somebody does share identifying information, we do make a decision that this crosses the threshold for a report. We will do that. And in 10 years of being at Stop It Now, we have done that less than 15 times.
Yeah. You gave me a number once. It was 1 in 150,000 or something like that. It was something, I mean, vast. I remember one person saying to both of us, you realize that those odds are still too great for some people, especially those that have been in prison. But you're making a huge dent.
It's kind of odd that, in fact, we just made one of our rare reports yesterday and today. It didn't come from an adult calling about their own behaviors. It came from a youth who was saying that she was being physically abused. Most of the reports that we have made have not been specific to child sexual abuse and have not been because an adult has disclosed that he or she or they are at risk of abusing or have abused.
Okay, thank you. So we're at something of a crossroads. Did you want to, I didn't know if you wanted to do more questions, conversation. You got some more slides for us?
I have just a few more, but not many. I've left this one up. People probably read the couple of the voices from Mike and Terry, so I won't hover there. Just again, some of the questions. Why am I like this? Will this go away? Is there help for me? I think these are important to understand because I think we take the humanity out of people who are struggling with their sexual interests, and we don't think that they are questioning themselves and are wondering what their life will be like, that they're not feeling shame and depression, and they are. And so then I'll start to wrap up then with this, David. It's just, here's our goals. We really want to show up for these folks. We want them to have the information they need. Who are the therapists that can help them? What are the resources that would help them? What kind of safety planning? Most importantly, I have to tell you, I think that the number one feedback we get from folks is, thank you for answering the phone and not hanging up on me. Thank you for just showing up. The being seen and being accepted in that moment of, a person who needs help must be the most powerful support that we can give. We know, again, that shame and isolation is just like, fuel to the fire. And it is our goal. You can tell I'm going through fast in case there's some questions, that we need to really overcome these obstacles so that we can help folks find a path that is safe. And then just my last slide then, David, before other questions, is I really want to invite everybody in this webinar and beyond to think about our own attitudes in this, about our yuck factor, and about many of us, we were just talking, David, earlier about what people think of those of us who work in this field. And many of us have come here maybe through a personal story, or if it's not ours, someone that we care about. We know what we read in the media. We know what our values are. We know what our relationship is to sex and sexual behaviors. I have talked to, esteemed therapists with lots of degrees who cannot talk about sex. And so we just need to understand, how we are looking at people through eyes of get the bad guy, punish them. I don't want to talk about sex. I don't want to see them. And how that, in fact, is what continues to foster an environment where children are at risk and where adults are at risk too. And we got to believe that we can prevent this. Okay, I'll stop talking.
All right. Thank you so much. Thanks so much, Jenny. And the way that I've always framed that when I've spoken to people too is, just when you finally get your own sexuality figured out, you get into this field and you have to suddenly understand other people's sexuality. Sometimes that can be a bit of a challenge. So,
it sure is. It's a constant learning.
Yeah, you just have. Yep, and you got to have some self-compassion along the way. Just before I turn it over to questions, I just have to share my own observation that, every time I hear somebody speak, there's always that one nugget. And the thing that I can take away from this is when you said, monsters don't ask for help. I think if there's one thing we could hang our hats on, just one little thing that we could say to the next kid that's wondering, what they're turning into or who they are. That's a great place to start, Jenny. Thank you.
Yeah.
So, okay, I just want to invite Senator Winfield to also join us if you like, if you have any questions. And I see one question wondering about who are the greatest resistors to these messages, and how do you cultivate change in with people who are resisting all of this to open their hearts and their minds. Jenny, you got any thoughts about that?
I do. I didn't know if Senator Winfield wanted to say something though first. Looked like maybe you.
No, I'm fine. I just want to thank you. You know, in the policy space I operate in, this is not how we talk about it, right? We do talk about it in a punitive sense, and you know, whether it be this issue or any other things in the criminal justice system, I really, really believe that an understanding of not only what happened, but who the people actually are that are on both sides of these issues is important to creating policy. So for me, this is very important and informative for what we are doing in Connecticut and beyond. So I just wanted to say thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Senator.
Yeah, it is different than how we usually talk about this, you know? And so in answer to that question, David, and the kind of then just kind of dovetails off of that, Senator, is when I'm speaking to a room of criminal for law enforcement folks, right? And what I know is that we all want the same thing. And that is we want children to be safe. And so for me, that's the beginning, is finding the common goal for ourselves, that we want people to be safe people. We want kids to be safe. We want adults to be safe. And that's a place that we can agree upon. So that's a great place to start. And so what I do find the biggest resistors really, somebody may think that I'm going to say that it's somebody who has been sexually abused, but in fact, and I didn't share the story of our founder, but in fact, and this was her story, she didn't want her father, who was the person who had sexually abused her, to get incarcerated, to be punished. She just wanted the abuse to stop. She wanted her father to get help. And so many folks I've spoken to who are survivors get that because they have loved the person who harmed them. So more often, the resistors are people who are in criminal justice, or who in some way are having to deal with the aftermath of abuse. And so it's understandable that for them, it's like, oh, but this has caused such devastation. You know, it's cost society so much, and they don't change. I've seen too many, you know, and so those are the folks that often I think that our goal is not to flip a switch and they have an aha moment, but rather to say, oh, all right, we all want the same thing, to keep kids safe, and we have some different approaches. Let's see what pieces of it we can share with each other as we start to bridge together a new approach.
Nice. I'm seeing a number of questions coming in, Jenny. So I'm going to get into it. I'm going to come back to Cindy's question from earlier, and I think very grateful for Billie Eilish's recent article about viewing violent porn to help open dialogue, and I totally agree with that comment. Thank you. After your years of experience, what legislative actions do you feel would help to improve outcomes in your work, Jenny?
That is a big question for me, David, because
Yes.
I've been working on that in our public policy headspace as well. I mean, for me, it is really important that we make education readily accessible to the adults who are responsible for children's well-being. And so it's not about kind of the pass the trash type of laws. For me, it's about making sure that educators and other folks in youth serving environments have the tools that they need and understand their role. Is I've been working with one group and I've asked about their understanding, because I was asked to do this. We don't live in the mandated reporting place by any means. My thought is that people don't even understand how to ask for help. And so our legislative landing place is often around making sure that we are addressing primary prevention needs in the form of education and resources and tools for the adults who are holding these environments for kids.
Hey, what would you say to the people who attend school board meetings and say something like, you can't be talking about child abuse prevention. You'll just be advertising child abuse. b-
I would say, have you looked outside your window or turned on a TV or turned on a video game or read a blog or watched anime? I mean, it's kids are exposed constantly to images of sex and violence combined.
Thank
And
you.
so if we are not talking to them, they're going to get that information somewhere else.
Yeah, thank
It's
you
that
very
simple.
much. It's another part of adults being adults. You also had a question, and I've already started to answer it in the chat. Would you kindly share research you rely upon with adults who have a sexual interest in children, but who do not act on their attraction? I wrote into the chat something about Project Dunkelfeld, which is in Germany. Other resources?
I would certainly, I don't have the research handy, David, and maybe you'll help me with this, but I would certainly look at some of the work with Jill Levin. What is Jill's last name?
Levinson. Yeah.
With Jill
Yeah.
Levinson. I would look at some of the work with Elizabeth Letourneau out of John Hopkins Center and the Moore Center for the Prevention of Child Sexual Abuse and their site Help Wanted. Both of these researchers, Brian Shields and certainly Alyssa Ackerman as well, and Gwen Willis, who have looked at the attitudes and shame and environmental factors that folks with minor attraction talk about as getting in the way of getting help and how they want help and the conversations that they've had. And I also look at our own research from our helpline and the voices that we hear.
Excellent. Thank you. And I've typed it into the chat too, Elizabeth
And
Letourneau.
Stop It Now UK and Stop It Now and the other Stop It Nows as well too.
Yep. And I'm seeing a comment here. Maggie Ingram out of the Johns Hopkins Moore Center. So yeah, the Moore Center, Moore. And so, Jenny, I'm just looking around for further questions, but one that I've had is you've actually, and another comment, which is Before You Act publishes a quarterly summary. And so I'm actually going to write that in.
I would add Prostasia Foundation as well, David.
Thank you.
The Prostasia Foundation also has some great research on their website.
Yep.
As well as Before You Act.
So just adding all of that into the chat as well.
Yes, and Ainsley Heisman, absolutely.
I was thinking
Cindy,
Ainsley.
We just trained Ainsley and her team to open up their own helpline in Canada.
Yeah, so any of these would be a great Google search to the person who asked that. Thank you very much. And you've actually kind of anticipated something that I was going to ask, this dialogue that we had about where, one thing I think about is trauma. You're pointing out kids have been curious about these things for a very, very long time. And now they have the internet to ask questions. With all of the time that you spent doing this and your endless devotion to the helpline, what have you learned about people who seek help over the years? What have you learned about people who don't seek help?
Oh, that's such a big question, Dave. Oh my gosh. I guess I didn't know what I didn't know 10 years ago. There's a voice that stays in my head really strongly. A man who called us, who said that he has sexual attraction to children. He had done everything in his life to stay safe. He had never thought he'd get married, happened to find an adult woman who he was attracted to. And it turns out that she was unable to bear children. And so he thought, I can have a life. And he said, so she's just talked to me about adoption. What do I do now? And that story has just struck me because this man he was so courageous and persevered in finding the resources to help him be safe. And I don't think I knew that there were people struggling to be safe. And I've already said it. And so it feels like I wish I had a more exciting answer. But the voices of the people that we've talked to is what has hit me stronger than anyone. I remember a counselor hanging up the phone in tears saying, if anybody had told me that I would feel sorry for somebody who had sexually abused a child, I would have spit in their face. And this man just broke my heart. And so I guess what I've learned most is to expand my humanity.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Let me just then ask a question that came in. It's a two-parter, your biggest frustration in advocacy work, but also what's your vision for the next 5 years?
My biggest frustration in the advocacy work is actually, Cindy, what we talked about would be the funding, the lack of understanding of primary prevention funding, that actually would save us trillions of dollars into the future. And the vision for the next 5 years is that the Stop It Now resources and resources similar to this continue to grow and become aware and are aware. I sat in on that treatment group, David, up in Maine that I had sat in on, where one of the men started crying and say, why didn't I know that you were here? So that's my vision, that people know we're here, that people know there's a resource for them, that they can pick up the phone or chat or text or whatever we're using in 5 years from now, that we're here for people in that moment, that they're willing to say, help me find my good wolf. That's what I want for us.
Fantastic. Wonderful. Thank you, Cindy. Thank you, Jenny. Listen to me. I know Cindy's back there. She asks good questions. Thank you, Cindy, for your good questions. Thank you, Jenny, for the excellent and very moving answer. So you talked about person first language. I know we've only got a couple of minutes, so but I intend to make the best use of them. We've talked about person first language, and by the time anybody comes to either of us, the whole rest of the world has called them a monster, or has implied to them that they're a monster because of what they might be interested in. The person calls and says, look, I'm a pedophile. I'm not going to lie to you. It's who I am. What thoughts do you have about that?
Oh, that we rather talk with folks about their behaviors. We'd rather talk with them about what they're feeling or thinking, and that we're not really looking to label those, because that could get in the way of whatever steps or relationships or need, whatever else that they need. So I don't know if I'm answering that completely, but I think, again, that language is just, it's numbing and it's constricting. And so we'll say that, let's put that aside. Plus, I also think it's a barrier for themselves. Great, that's who I'll be. And it's like, I don't know, maybe you are a person who will sexually abuse a child. That's true.
Do you want to be more than that label?
Do you want to be more than that label?
As you're talking to me, I'm thinking that you do, my friend. Yeah. So, hey, a couple of last small things. Are there any free or inexpensive trainings that you would recommend?
Well, I do hear that Safer Society has some great training, so I would check out Safer Society.
Safersociety.org. Yep.
Stop It Now runs webinars about quarterly. They are free and they are posted. I mean, they're a small donation if you want to make it. They're posted on our training page of our website. I'm sure there's more, but right now that's the I'm sorry to market Stop It Now, but those are where I would go for trainings right now.
Sure. And last question. Oh,
yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah. Over to you, Jenny.
Well, I saw Cindy's question about Fran, our co-founder.
Yep.
Fran began this work because of her interest in restorative justice. So that is at the foundation of what we do, understanding. And in fact, a project we did years ago before I was part were the dialogue projects of bringing people together, one who had been abused, one who had caused harm, not within their relationship, and to model conversations that we can have. So yes, very much committed to restorative justice in the work that we do.
Yeah, she certainly has been indeed. And I've been profoundly impacted by seeing her a couple of times in keynotes. And her saying, all I ever wanted was for it to stop. So you're getting some high marks in the chat. Hi, Jenny. Thanks for the great webinar and nice to see you again. And so on that note, I've got it as 8 o'clock on the dot here on the East Coast of the US. So it does mean that we need to wrap up. So I'm going to say, Jenny, thank you so much for participating today. And I see a quick question also coming in. How do people contact you? It's J. Coleman at stopitnow.org. And Coleman is spelled with an E. I think the Coleman Lanterns don't have the, I forget.
They're the same as Coleman Lantern, but no relationship. But you can just visit stopitnow.org. You'll find links to me, training, anything you need.
Yeah.
Yeah, happy to hear
And
from folks.
great. And the question has to do with confidentiality. So I'm going to refer that person over to stopitnow.org because it's a great question and that deserves a great answer, which will be available there. I saw Senator Winfield popping in and out. So if you have any last words, and also Lori is saying great presentation. I'm such a fan of your work. Thanks so much. And this is somebody joining us after no doubt a long day of being an attorney. So on that note, I think we did it, Jenny. Thanks again. It is always such a pleasure to talk with you and to find out how much we think alike, I might add. So with that, we'll sign off. Thanks, everybody.
Take care, folks. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Good night.
Bye-bye.